They told her she was crazy to walk into the High Court of Manhattan alone. They whispered that her husband, a billionaire real estate tycoon, had hired the Grim Reaper of divorce attorneys, a man who had never lost a case. As she sat there staring at the empty chair beside her, her husband laughed in her face, mocking her poverty, her silence, and her apparent stupidity. He thought he had already won. He thought he was minutes away from stripping her of her children and every dime she owned. But he forgot one thing. He forgot who her mother was. And when those heavy oak doors finally swung open, the laughter didn't just stop. It died in their throats, because the woman who walked in wasn't just a lawyer. She was the one the judge was terrified of. The air inside courtroom 402 of the New York State Supreme Court was always cold, but today for Peter Sterling it felt like standing naked in a blizzard. She sat alone at the defendant's table. Her hands, red and chapped from the cold wind outside, were folded neatly on top of a battered manila folder. She wore a simple grey cardigan that had seen better days and a skirt that was professional but clearly bought off the rack at a discount store 3 seasons ago. To anyone looking at the gallery, she looked exactly like what her husband said she was, a pathetic, washed-up housewife who was out of her depth. Across the aisle, the atmosphere was entirely different. It smelled of expensive cologne, old leather, and victory. Derek Sterling, the man she had spent 7 years of her life with, sat reclined in his chair, looking more like he was lounging in a VIP section of a club than attending a custody hearing. He wore a custom-tailored navy Brioni suit that cost more than Peter's car. On his wrist, a platinum Patek Philippe caught the sterile fluorescent lights of the courtroom flashing every time he gestured. But the real threat wasn't Derek. It was the man sitting next to him, Bradford the Butcher Halloway. Halloway was a legend in New York, but for all the wrong reasons. He was the attorney you hired when you didn't just want to win. You wanted to destroy the other person. He was a shark in a 3-piece charcoal suit, known for burying opponents under mountains of paperwork and intimidation tactics until they broke. Rumor had it he charged $2,000 an hour just to listen to you speak. Derek leaned over to Halloway, whispering something loud enough for Peter to hear. "Look at her, Brad. She actually showed up. I told you she was delusional. Who does she think is going to help her legal aid?" Halloway didn't smile. He just glanced at Peter with eyes that looked like dead fish, cold, unblinking, and entirely devoid of empathy. He checked his watch. "Let's make this quick, Derek. I have a lunch reservation at Le Bernardin at 1. I don't want to be late because your wife decides to cry." Peter heard them. She felt the sting of their words like a physical slap, but she didn't flinch. She just kept her eyes on the judge's bench, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Just wait," she told herself. "Just hold on." The bailiff's voice boomed, cutting through the murmurs of the gallery. "All rise, the Honorable Judge Silas Pendergast presiding." Judge Pendergast was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. He was old stern and had zero patience for theatrics. He took his seat, adjusted his glasses, and looked down at the docket. "Case number 44992. Pendergast grumbled, his voice gravelly. "Sterling versus Sterling. Custody hearing and asset division." He looked at the plaintiff's table. "Mr. Halloway, good to see you again. And you, Your Honor." Halloway said, his voice smooth as silk. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with a confident flourish. Then Pendergast looked at Peter. His eyebrows knit together in confusion. He looked around the empty space next to her. "Mrs. Sterling," the judge said, peering over his spectacles. Where is your counsel? Peter stood up slowly. Her legs felt weak. I don't have anyone with me right now. Your Honor. A ripple of laughter went through the courtroom. Derek didn't even try to hide his snort of amusement. He covered his mouth with his hand, shaking his head as he looked back at his entourage in the gallery. His assistant, his PR manager, and his new girlfriend, a 22-year-old model named Chloe, who was chewing gum and scrolling on her phone. "Quiet!" Judge Pendergast snapped. The room fell silent instantly. He turned his gaze back to Peter. "Mrs. Sterling, do you understand the gravity of these proceedings? Your husband is petitioning for full custody of your 2 children, citing financial instability and emotional negligence. He is also petitioning to enforce the prenuptial agreement, which, according to his filing, leaves you with, well, nothing." "I understand, Your Honor," Peter said, her voice small but steady. "And you intend to represent yourself against Mr. Halloway?" The judge asked, his tone dripping with skepticism. "I must advise you against that. This is a complex case." Halloway stood up, smiling like a predator. "Your Honor, if I may. It seems Mrs. Sterling is simply accepting the reality of the situation. She knows she has no grounds to contest. Perhaps we can expedite this ruling. My client is a busy man, and the children need stability, which Mrs. Sterling clearly cannot provide." Derek leaned back, crossing his legs. "She's broke, Judge," Derek called out, ignoring protocol. "She can't afford a lawyer because she spent all my money on, well, who knows what. She's just wasting the court's time." "Mr. Sterling, you will speak only when spoken to," Pendergast warned, though he didn't seem too angry. He looked back at Peter. "Mrs. Sterling, I am going to give you one chance to request a continuance to find a public defender, although, given the assets involved, you may not qualify." Peter took a deep breath. She checked the clock on the wall. 9:05 a.m. She's late. "Your Honor," Peter said, gripping the edge of the table, "I am not representing myself. My attorney, she is on her way. She was delayed by a flight issue." Halloway chuckled a dry, rasping sound. "A flight issue? Your Honor, this is a stalling tactic. Mrs. Sterling has had months to prepare. If her attorney isn't here, it's because she doesn't exist. She's making a mockery of this court." "I agree," Judge Pendergast said, shuffling his papers. "Mrs. Sterling Court starts at 9:00 a.m. sharp. If your counsel is not present, we proceed without them. Mr. Halloway, you may begin your opening statement." Peter felt the blood drain from her face. She turned around, looking at the heavy double doors at the back of the room. "Please," she thought, "please don't let me down." "Thank you, Your Honor," Halloway boomed, stepping into the center of the floor. He didn't even look at Peter. He addressed the judge, his voice commanding and theatrical. "Your Honor, we are here today to save 2 innocent children from a life of neglect. The woman sitting there," he pointed a finger at Peter without looking at her, "is a master of deception. She trapped my client, Mr. Sterling, into a marriage for money. And now that the marriage has dissolved, she seeks to use the children as pawns. But we have evidence, financial records, witness testimonies, that prove she is unfit, unstable, and frankly destitute." Derek was smirking so hard, it looked painful. He pulled out his phone, texting someone under the table, probably telling them the celebration party was on. Halloway continued pacing back and forth. "She has no job, no home of her own, no support system. Mr. Sterling, on the other hand, is a pillar of the community, a philanthropist, a devoted father." Peter bit her lip until it tasted like copper. A devoted father, Derek hadn't seen their twins, Leo and Sam, in 3 months because he was too busy in Disturbed on his yacht in Monaco. "We ask for an immediate summary judgment," Halloway concluded, slamming his hand on the railing. "Granting full custody to Mr. Sterling and upholding the prenup in its entirety." "Let's end this charade." Judge Pendergast nodded slowly. "It seems straightforward. Mrs. Sterling, unless you have a compelling legal argument to present right now, I am inclined to rule in favor of the plaintiff." "I object," Peter cried out, her voice trembling. "On what grounds?" Pendergast sighed. "You aren't a lawyer, Mrs. Sterling." "On the grounds that the prenup was signed under duress," Peter shouted, desperation taking over. "And Derek, Mr. Sterling, is hiding assets, millions of dollars in offshore accounts." Derek laughed out loud. "Prove it, honey. You can't even pay your rent. How are you going to prove anything? Order." Pendergast banged his gavel. "Mrs. Sterling, without counsel to present evidence properly. These are just accusations." "I am sorry." The judge picked up his pen. "I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff regarding the creak." The sound was heavy and loud. The double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open. They were pushed open with a force that commanded attention. Everyone turned. Derek twisted in his seat, annoyed at the interruption. Halloway looked over his shoulder, ready to scold whoever was interrupting his victory. But when they saw who was standing in the doorway, the annoyance vanished. For Derek, it was confusion. For Halloway, it was shock. But for Judge Pendergast, the color drained from his face as if he had seen a ghost. The woman standing in the doorway was small, perhaps only 5'3", but her presence filled the cavernous room instantly. She was older, her hair a striking defiant silver cut into a sharp bob that framed a face made of steel and intelligence. She wore a black suit, not modern, but timelessly elegant, Chanel vintage, with a silk scarf tied effortlessly around her neck. She didn't carry a briefcase. She carried a single thin leather folio, and she walked with a cane, a polished ebony stick with a silver handle, but she didn't use it for support. She used it like a weapon, tapping it rhythmically against the floorboards as she walked down the center aisle. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed in the stunned silence. "Who is that?" Derek whispered to Halloway, irritated. "Is that her mom?" "I thought her mom was some retired librarian in Ohio." Halloway didn't answer. His mouth was slightly open. The blood had left his face. He looked like a man who had just realized the shark tank he was swimming in had no glass. "Mr. Halloway." Derek nudged him. "Brad, who is she?" Halloway swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "That," he whispered, his voice trembling, "is Victoria Fairchild." Derek frowned. "So who cares?" "You idiot," Halloway hissed uncharacteristically, losing his cool. "She isn't just a lawyer. She's the Iron Lady. She was the chief prosecutor for the Southern District in the 90s. She taught constitutional law at Harvard. She's been retired for 15 years. They said she was dead." Peter stood up, tears welling in her eyes. "Mom," she whispered. Victoria Fairchild didn't look at her daughter yet. Her eyes were locked on the bench, locked on Judge Silas Pendergast. "I apologize for my tardiness." "Your Honor," Victoria said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it had a crystalline clarity that reached every corner of the room. It was a voice trained to dismantle lies. "The traffic on the Brooklyn Bridge was dreadful. I assume you haven't issued a ruling yet." Judge Pendergast cleared his throat, adjusting his robe nervously. Ms. Fairchild, I had no idea you were representing the defendant. I thought you had retired to Switzerland. I did, Victoria said, finally reaching the gate that separated the gallery from the court floor. She pushed it open with the tip of her cane. But when I heard that a certain butcher was trying to carve up my daughter like a holiday turkey, I decided to come out of retirement for one last dance. She walked past Halloway. She didn't look at him, but Halloway instinctively took a step back, pulling his expensive suit jacket tighter around himself. Victoria reached the defendant's table and placed her hand gently on Peter's shoulder. For a fleeting second, her face softened. "Sit down, darling. Wipe your eyes. We don't cry in front of predators. It confuses them." Peter sat feeling a wave of relief so strong it almost made her dizzy. Victoria turned to face the room. She placed her thin leather folio on the table. "Now," Victoria said, turning to Halloway. "Mr. Halloway, I read your opening statement while I was in the car. Very theatrical, destitute, unstable, master of deception. Very colorful adjectives." Halloway straightened his tie, trying to regain his composure. He was the top dog now. She was old news. "Ms. Fairchild, with all due respect, your reputation precedes you, but the facts are the facts. Your client, your daughter, signed a prenuptial agreement. She has no income. My client is a billionaire." "A billionaire," Victoria repeated, tasting the word. "Yes. Let's talk about that." She opened her folio. It didn't contain stacks of paper. It contained a single thick envelope and a USB drive. "Your Honor," Victoria addressed the judge, "Mr. Halloway is petitioning for a summary judgment based on the validity of a prenuptial agreement signed 7 years ago. Is that correct?" "It is." Pendergast nodded, "and he claims Mr. Sterling is a pillar of the community with transparent finances." "We do," Halloway interjected firmly. "Mr. Sterling's assets are fully disclosed." Victoria smiled. It was a terrifying smile. It didn't reach her eyes. "Judge Pendergast, I move to dismiss the plaintiff's petition for custody immediately, and I am filing a counter-motion for emergency asset freezing regarding Mr. Sterling's holdings in the Cayman Islands, specifically the shell company known as Obsidian Ventures." Derek Sterling froze. The smug grin vanished from his face instantly. He gripped the arms of his chair so hard, his knuckles turned white. Halloway whipped his head around to look at his client. He saw the panic in Derek's eyes. "Objection!" Halloway shouted. "This is ambush litigation. We have no record of any Obsidian Ventures. This is a fabrication." "Is it?" Victoria asked calmly. She picked up the USB drive. "Because before I came here, I made a stop. Not at a law library, but at the office of the district attorney. You see, I still have a few friends there. Friends who specialize in forensic accounting." She began to walk toward the witness stand, her cane tapping rhythmically. Tap, tap, tap. "You see, Derek," Victoria said, addressing him directly for the first time. "You made a mistake. You thought Peter was just a lonely girl from Ohio with no connections. You forgot that she changed her last name when she married you. You forgot she was a Fairchild." She turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, the document I am holding proves that 3 days before filing for divorce, Mr. Sterling transferred $250 million into an unlisted account in the Caymans, an account he failed to declare in his discovery documents." The courtroom gasped. The reporters in the back row began typing furiously on their laptops. "That is a lie," Derek shouted. standing up. She's lying. Who is this old hag? Sit down, Mr. Sterling. Judge Pendergast barked, his face reddening. Perjury. Victoria said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. Fraud. And attempting to mislead the court. In my day, Mr. Halloway, we called that a career-ending move. What do you call it now? Halloway was sweating, visible beads of sweat on his forehead. He looked at Derek. Is it true? He whispered harshly. Did you move the money? Shut up, Derek hissed. Fix this. I can't fix perjury, you moron, Halloway muttered. Victoria wasn't done. But that's just the money, Your Honor. Mr. Halloway also mentioned that my daughter is unfit as a mother. He claims Mr. Sterling is a devoted father. Victoria reached into her folio again. She pulled out a photograph. It was grainy, clearly taken with a long-range lens. Mr. Sterling claims he was in a business meeting in Tokyo last month during the twins' birthday, a meeting that prevented him from attending. Is that right? Halloway hesitated. That is what the affidavit says. Strange, Victoria said, holding up the photo. Because this photo, time-stamped on that exact date, shows Mr. Sterling on a private yacht in St. Bart's, and he isn't in a meeting, unless business meeting is code for doing lines of cocaine off the stomach of a woman who is decidedly not his wife. The courtroom erupted. Camera flashes went off. Derek's face went purple. Where did you get that? He screamed. That's private property. It was posted on Instagram, Victoria said dryly. By your girlfriend Chloe. She really should check her privacy settings. Public profiles are such a liability. She turned to the gallery. Chloe, the model, squeaked and ducked her head, shoving her phone into her purse as everyone stared at her. Victoria turned back to the judge, her expression hardening into stone. Now, Judge Pendergast, I remember when you were a junior clerk. You were a man of integrity, so I am going to ask you once. Do you want to continue entertaining this man's lies, or are you ready to hear the real motion I have prepared? The judge looked at the sweating billionaire, the panicked lawyer, and then at the iron-willed woman standing before him. Mrs. Fairchild, the judge said, his voice respectful. The floor is yours. The silence in courtroom 402 was heavy, the kind of silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. Derek Sterling slumped back into his chair, his face a mask of sullen rage. Beside him, Bradford Halloway was furiously typing on his tablet, likely trying to move assets or bury evidence before the court order could be processed. But his hands were shaking. Just slightly. Victoria Fairchild didn't sit down. She remained standing in the center of the aisle, her hands resting atop her ebony cane. She looked at the judge, then at Derek, and finally at Peter. Mom, Peter whispered, tugging gently on Victoria's sleeve. The prenup. It says I get nothing if I contest the divorce. If we push this and lose, I'll be homeless. Derek swore he'd ruin me. Victoria looked down at her daughter, her eyes softening into a look of profound sorrow that vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the hardened steel of a prosecutor. Peter, she said loud enough for the table to hear. A contract signed with a gun to your head isn't a contract. It's a ransom note. And we are done paying ransom. Victoria turned to the judge. Your Honor, regarding the prenuptial agreement, Mr. Halloway claims it is ironclad. I claim it is a piece of fiction written by a criminal conspiracy. I would like to call Mr. Sterling to the stand for a limited cross-examination regarding the circumstances of the signing. Halloway shot up like a jack-in-the-box. Objection. This is a preliminary hearing. Mr. Sterling is not on trial. He lied about his assets 5 minutes ago, Judge Pendergast said, peering over his glasses. Credibility is now the central issue of this hearing, Mr. Halloway. Overruled. Mr. Sterling, take the stand. Derek looked at Halloway with panic. Halloway leaned in his voice a harsh whisper. Stick to the script. You didn't force her. She had her own lawyer. Remember the name Arthur Miller. Stick to that. Derek stood up, buttoning his jacket. He tried to muster his usual arrogance, that billionaire swagger that worked in boardrooms. But as he walked past Victoria Fairchild, he flinched. She smelled of lavender and old paper, a scent that somehow terrified him more than Halloway's brimstone cologne. Derek took the oath, sat in the witness box, and glared at Victoria. Mr. Sterling, Victoria began pacing slowly. Let's go back 7 years. You presented Peter with a prenuptial agreement 3 days before the wedding. Is that correct? Standard procedure for someone of my wealth? Derek scoffed. I had to protect my empire. Of course. An empire built on... Well, we'll get to that, Victoria said smoothly. Now, at the time, Peter was 22. She was a kindergarten teacher. You were 35 and already worth $500 million. You told her she needed independent legal counsel to review the document, correct? I insisted on it, Derek said, puffing out his chest. I wanted everything to be fair. I even paid for her lawyer because she couldn't afford one. How generous, Victoria murmured. And the lawyer's name was Arthur Miller. Yes, a reputable man. Indeed, a very reputable man. Victoria stopped pacing. She pulled a document from her folio. I have here the affidavit signed by Mr. Miller stating he reviewed the prenup with Peter and advised her it was fair. Peter signed it based on his advice. Exactly. Derek smiled. So it's legal. She had counsel. Victoria looked at the paper, then at Derek. Tell me, Derek, did you know Mr. Miller before you recommended him to Peter? Derek hesitated. His eyes flicked to Halloway. Halloway gave a microscopic nod. I knew of him. He was a top family law attorney. I wanted Peter to have the best. You knew of him, Victoria repeated. So you weren't friends. You didn't have a business relationship. No. Derek lied. Absolutely not. That would be a conflict of interest. Victoria smiled. A conflict of interest. Yes, it would. She turned to the gallery. Bailiff, could you please hand this document to the witness? She produced a glossy photograph and a stack of financial records. Derek took them. He looked at the photo, and his face went pale. This is a photograph from the Sterling Charity Gala, dating back 10 years. Victoria narrated for the court. 3 years before you met Peter. In the photo, you are shaking hands with a man. That man is Arthur Miller. And you aren't just shaking hands. You are handing him a giant check for $50,000. I donate to many people, Derek stammered. And the financial records beneath the photo. Victoria continued, her voice rising like a coming storm. These are bank transfers from your company, Sterling Holdings, to a firm called Miller Consulting. You paid Arthur Miller a monthly retainer of $10,000 for 5 years before he represented Peter. The courtroom buzzed. Halloway put his head in his hands. You hired your own employee to pretend to be your wife's independent lawyer, Victoria thundered, pointing her cane at him. You paid him to tell her to sign a document that stripped her of her rights. That is not a prenup, Mr. Sterling. That is fraud. It was just business, Derek yelled, losing his composure. She was a gold digger. I had to ensure she wouldn't take half. So you admit it, Victoria asked softly. You admit you manipulated the legal representation. I admit I'm smart enough to protect my money from a nobody like her, Derek shouted, pointing at Peter. Your Honor. Victoria turned to the judge, her face calm. By his own admission, the defendant knowingly engaged in fraudulent inducement. The prenuptial agreement is void ab initio. Judge Pendergast looked at Derek with pure disgust. Mr. Halloway, the judge said, his voice ice-cold. I am tossing the prenup. It is null and void. We will proceed with a standard equitable distribution of marital assets. Peter gasped, covering her mouth. The prenup was gone, just like that. But Victoria wasn't smiling. She walked back to the table, leaning close to Peter. Don't celebrate yet, she whispered. Now comes the hard part. We took his shield. Now we have to take his sword. She looked across the aisle. Halloway was no longer looking at his tablet. He was looking at Victoria, with a hatred so pure it was almost palpable. He stood up slowly. Your Honor, Halloway said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. Ms. Fairchild plays a good game with paperwork. But this is a custody hearing. And while money is one thing, the safety of the children is another. We are prepared to show that Mrs. Sterling is psychologically unfit to care for a hamster, let alone 2 children. Victoria gripped her cane. Here we go, she muttered. Bradford Halloway didn't walk. He prowled. He moved to the center of the courtroom, buttoning his jacket, shedding the embarrassment of the prenup, ruling like a snake shedding skin. He was back in his element destruction of character. Your Honor, Halloway began, his voice dripping with faux concern. We can argue about money all day. Mr. Sterling is a businessman. He cuts corners. It's unfortunate, but it's not relevant to parenting. What is relevant is stability. Sanity. He turned to point a long, bony finger at Peter. 6 months ago, police were called to the Sterling residence. They found Mrs. Sterling in the nursery, screaming at walls, breaking furniture, and claiming that people were watching her. She was taken to St. Jude's Hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. Peter shrank in her seat. She remembered that night. The terror. The shadows moving in the corners. The feeling that she was losing her mind. She was diagnosed with severe paranoid delusions and acute hysteria. Halloway continued, picking up a medical file. Dr. Aris Thorne, a leading psychiatrist, recommended she be institutionalized for her own safety. Mr. Sterling, out of love, refused to have her locked up. He kept her home. He hired nurses. He tried to help her. But she refused medication. She is a danger to herself and those children. Halloway dropped the file on the judge's bench with a heavy thud. How can we give custody to a woman who hallucinates? Halloway asked the room. A woman who thinks the walls have eyes. Derek was nodding vigorously in the witness box, playing the part of the long-suffering husband. It was terrifying, Your Honor. She was screaming that I was recording her, that I was trying to drive her crazy. I was just trying to calm her down. Judge Pendergast looked at the file, his expression troubled. This is a serious report, Miss Fairchild. Dr. Thorne is a well-respected specialist. If your client has a history of unmedicated psychosis— Peter looked at her mother, tears streaming down her face. Mom, I'm not crazy, I swear. But I saw them. I saw the lights in the vents. I heard the voices. Victoria placed a hand on Peter's trembling arm. I know you did, sweetheart. I know. Victoria stood up. She didn't walk to the podium. She walked straight toward Halloway. She stopped inches from him, forcing him to look down at her. Dr. Aris Thorne, Victoria said. An interesting choice of expert witness. Very expensive. $500 for a 15-minute session. He is the best, Holloway sneered. He is a drug pusher with a medical license, Victoria corrected calmly. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, Mr. Holloway omitted a small detail about that night, the night Peter went crazy. Victoria reached into her bag. She didn't pull out a document. She pulled out a small black device. It looked like a tiny beetle made of plastic and wire. What is that? Judge Pendergast asked. This, Victoria said, holding it up, is a high-frequency auditory transmitter. It's military-grade tech. It emits a sound that is just on the edge of human hearing. Prolonged exposure causes migraines, disorientation, and visual hallucinations. The room went deadly silent. Where did you get that? Holloway asked, his voice cracking. I had a team sweep Peter's former bedroom at the Sterling estate yesterday, while Derek was busy partying in St. Bart's, Victoria said. We found 4 of them, hidden in the vents. The exact vents Peter was screaming at. She turned to Derek. You didn't just gaslight her, Derek. You tortured her. You installed devices to induce a breakdown so you could paint her as unfit. That's absurd, Derek stammered, but he looked like he was about to vomit. I have a security system. Maybe it's part of the alarm. It's not an alarm, Victoria snapped, and we traced the purchase order. She whipped around to face Holloway. And this is where it gets interesting for you, Mr. Holloway. Holloway took a step back. Me, I'm just the attorney. Are you? Victoria smiled. Because the invoice for these devices wasn't sent to Derek. It was sent to Holloway Legal Group, LLC, billed under litigation support expenses. She slammed a piece of paper onto the Holloway's table. You didn't just represent a bad man, Bradford. You helped him manufacture the evidence. You bought the devices. You hired the doctor to write a fake diagnosis based on symptoms you created. That's privileged information, Holloway shrieked. You can't use that. How did you get my billing records? I didn't, Victoria said coolly. My friends at the FBI did. You see, when you purchase military-grade surveillance equipment without a license, it tends to flag a few databases. I just connected the dots for them. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened again. 2 men in dark suits walked in. They didn't look like lawyers. They looked like federal agents. They stood silently by the door, arms crossed. Holloway froze. He looked at the agents, then at Victoria. You called the feds, Holloway whispered. I told you. Victoria said, her voice hard as diamond. I didn't come here to win a custody battle. I came here to clean house. You tried to make my daughter think she was insane. You tried to take her babies away by driving her into a mental institution. That isn't law, Bradford. That is racketeering. That is assault. Victoria turned to the judge. Your Honor, I move to strike Dr. Thorne's report from the record as fraudulent evidence, and I suggest Mr. Holloway might want to recuse himself. He's going to need his own lawyer very soon. Judge Pendergast looked at the devices, the invoice, and the federal agents at the door. He looked at Holloway, who was now trembling uncontrollably. Mr. Holloway, the judge said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. Is this true? Did you purchase these devices? Holloway opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Derek. Derek looked away already, distancing himself. I was following client instructions, Holloway squeaked, throwing Derek under the bus instantly. You billed it, Derek shouted. It was your idea. You said, if she's not crazy, we'll make her crazy. Silence, Pendergast roared, banging his gavel so hard the handle cracked. The courtroom was in chaos. Reporters were shouting into phones. The agents at the back were moving forward. Peter sat stunned. The voices, The fear. It hadn't been her. It had been them. All of them. She looked at her mother, who stood amidst the storm she had created, perfectly calm, adjusting her silk scarf. But Victoria wasn't done. She tapped her cane on the floor. "We have dealt with the money," she said to the room. "We have dealt with the sanity." She turned her gaze to the back of the room, where Derek's girlfriend, Chloe, was trying to sneak out. "Now," Victoria said darkly, "let's talk about the children and where they really were while Derek was in St. Bart's." The courtroom felt less like a hall of justice and more like a crime scene where the bodies were still being discovered. Bradford Halloway was slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the federal agents guarding the exit. Derek Sterling was gripping the railing of the witness box, his knuckles white, sweat dripping down his nose. But Victoria Fairchild was calm. She stood in the center of the storm, her hands resting lightly on her cane. "Mr. Sterling," Victoria said, her voice deceptively soft. "You claimed earlier that the children, Leo and Sam, were in a secure educational environment while you were away on business. Is that correct?" Derek licked his lips. "Yes. Top-tier boarding school. The best money can buy. I want them to have discipline." "Discipline?" Victoria repeated. "Is that what we call it now?" She turned to the bailiff. "I would like to call my final witness. Please bring in Ms. Beatrice O'Connell." The doors opened. A woman walked in. She wasn't wealthy. She wore a simple wool coat and sensible shoes. She was middle-aged, with a kind face that was currently etched with deep lines of worry and anger. Derek's eyes went wide. "No," he whispered. "She was fired. She signed an NDA. She can't speak. NDAs don't cover child endangerment." "Derek," Victoria said coldly. "Ms. O'Connell, please take the stand." Beatrice took the stand. She looked at Peter and gave a small, tearful smile. Peter covered her mouth, recognizing her immediately. Beatrice had been the head nanny for 3 years before Derek fired her abruptly 2 months ago. "Ms. O'Connell," Victoria began, "you were the primary caregiver for the twins until recently. Why were you terminated?" Beatrice took a shaky breath. "Mr. Sterling fired me because I let the boys FaceTime their mother." "I see," Victoria said. "And after you were fired, who took over the care of the children?" "He hired a security firm," Beatrice said, her voice trembling with rage. "He said nannies were too soft. He hired a firm called Blackguard Security, men who usually do nightclub bouncing. And where are the children now?" "They are at the Sterling summer home in the Hamptons," Beatrice said. "But it's not a home anymore. I went back there yesterday to try and retrieve my personal belongings. I saw them." "What did you see, Beatrice?" Victoria asked gently. Beatrice began to cry. "They were locked in the guest wing. There were bars on the windows. Mr. Sterling had the security guards watching them like prisoners. I heard one of the guards yelling at Leo because he was crying for his mom. The guard told him." She choked up. "What did the guard tell him?" Victoria pressed. "The guard told him that his mother didn't want him." Beatrice sobbed. "He told a 6-year-old boy that his mother had sold them for a paycheck, and that if they didn't stop crying, they wouldn't get dinner." A collective gasp swept through the room. Peter let out a guttural sound, a cry of pure maternal pain, and buried her face in her hands. Victoria's expression didn't change, but her eyes were burning. She turned to Derek. "You didn't put them in school," Victoria said, her voice low and dangerous. "You put them in a private prison. You hired thugs to terrify your own children into submission so they wouldn't ask for Peter." I needed them secure," Derek shouted his defense, crumbling into hysteria. She would have tried to kidnap them. I was protecting my heirs. Heirs! Victoria spat the word out like poison. They aren't assets, Derek. They are little boys, and you broke them. Victoria turned to the judge. Your Honor, I have a video on this drive. It was taken by a neighbor in the Hamptons who was concerned about the noise. It shows one of Mr. Sterling's security guards grabbing Sam by the arm and throwing him into the house like a sack of potatoes. She held up the drive. Play it. Judge Pendergast ordered, his voice shaking. The bailiff plugged it in. The large screen on the wall flickered to life. The video was shaky, taken from over a hedge, but the audio was clear. Get inside, you little brat, a deep voice bellowed. Then the sound of a child screaming. I want Mummy. I want Mummy. Shut up. Your mummy is gone. She's dead to you. The screen went black. For 10 seconds, nobody breathed. Then Judge Pendergast stood up. He didn't look like a judge anymore. He looked like a grandfather who was about to commit violence. Bailiff, Pendergast said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. Take Mr. Sterling into custody. What? Derek shrieked. You can't do that. I'm a billionaire. I have rights. You are a monster, Pendergast said, and you are in contempt of my court, common decency, and humanity. I am revoking your bail. I am revoking your custody rights. I am issuing an immediate protective order for those children. 2 officers moved toward Derek. He scrambled back, knocking over his chair. Brad, Derek screamed at his lawyer. Do something, fix this. Bradford. Holloway didn't move. He was staring at the floor, knowing his career was over. He can't help you, Derek, Victoria said, stepping closer to the witness box. Because he's next. You witch! Derek lunged. It happened in a blur. Derek Sterling, fueled by rage and humiliation, lunged over the railing of the witness box toward Victoria. He raised a fist, intending to strike the old woman who had dismantled his life in under an hour. Mom? Peter screamed. But Victoria didn't flinch. She didn't retreat. As Derek lunged, Victoria simply shifted her weight. She raised her ebony cane not to strike, but to block. She caught Derek's wrist with the hook of the cane, twisted her body with the grace of a woman who had learned Aikido in the 70s, and swept his legs out from under him. Derek hit the floor with a bone-jarring crack. He groaned, writhing in pain. Victoria stood over him, the tip of her cane resting gently on his chest, pinning him down. I prosecuted the mob in 1985, Derek, she said, looking down at him with disdain. I've had hitmen try to kill me in parking garages. You think a spoiled man-child in a Brioni suit scares me? She leaned in close. You will never see those children again. You will never see a dime of your money again. And if you ever say my daughter's name, I will come back. And next time, I won't bring a cane. I'll bring the entire United States Marine Corps. The officers grabbed Derek, hauled him up, and handcuffed him. He was weeping now, broken and humiliated, dragged out of the courtroom like a common criminal. With Derek gone, the room felt lighter, but the business wasn't finished. Victoria turned her attention to the defense table. Bradford Holloway was trying to pack his briefcase. His hands were shaking so badly, he couldn't get the zipper to close. Going somewhere, Bradford? Victoria asked. Holloway froze. He looked up, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped rat. The hearing is over. My client has been removed. I am leaving. Not yet, Judge Pendergast said. He was still standing, his face grim. Miss Fairchild, you mentioned federal agents earlier, regarding the surveillance equipment. Yes, Your Honor, Victoria said. She walked over to Halloway's table. You see, Bradford made a classic mistake. He got greedy. He didn't just buy illegal surveillance equipment for Derek. He bought it for all his wealthy clients. She turned to the gallery, addressing the cameras directly now. I have spent the last week reviewing Mr. Halloway's wins over the last 10 years. Custody battles, corporate lawsuits, divorces. In every single case, the opposition mysteriously had their private emails leaked or suffered a mental breakdown or had their cars tracked. Halloway's face was grey. This is slander, he whispered. It's RICO, Victoria corrected. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. You were running a criminal enterprise disguised as a law firm. You used wiretapping, intimidation, and bribery to guarantee wins for the highest bidder. She signaled to the agents at the door. Agent Miller, if you would. The two men in suits stepped forward. One of them pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Bradford Halloway, the agent announced. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, witness tampering, and illegal surveillance. You have the right to remain silent. You can't prove it, Halloway shrieked as they grabbed his arms. I have files, I have dirt on everyone, judges, senators, and I have your IT guy, Victoria said smoothly. He flipped yesterday. Turns out you didn't pay him enough to go to prison for you. He gave us the server passwords, Bradford. We have everything. Halloway slumped. The fight went out of him. As he was led away, shuffling past Peter, he didn't look like the butcher anymore. He looked like a small, sad man who had forgotten that eventually the bill always comes due. The courtroom doors closed behind him. Silence returned to courtroom 402, but this time it was a peaceful silence. Judge Pendergast sat down heavily. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked at Peter, who was still sitting at the defendant's table, trembling tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Sterling, Pendergast said softly. Peter looked up. Yes, Your Honor. In 20 years on the bench, Pendergast said, I have never seen such a display of, well, everything. I owe you an apology. The court failed you. We almost let a monster destroy your life. He picked up his pen. I am issuing a final ruling. Full legal and physical custody of Leo and Sam Sterling is awarded to Peter Sterling. All visitation rights for Derek Sterling are permanently suspended, pending a criminal investigation. He signed a paper furiously. Furthermore, regarding the division of assets, since the prenup is void due to fraud, and since Mr. Sterling attempted to hide assets, I am invoking the unclean hands doctrine. I am awarding 100% of the marital assets to Mrs. Sterling as punitive damages for the emotional distress and abuse caused. Peter gasped. 100%. Everything, Pendergast said. The houses, the cars, the accounts, even the yacht in St. Bart's. It's all yours, Peter. Use it to give those boys a good life. He looked at Victoria. A small, respectful smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. And Miss Fairchild? Yes, Your Honor, Victoria asked, leaning on her cane. If you ever decide to come out of retirement permanently, please give me a warning. I need to make sure my blood pressure medication is up to date. Victoria chuckled. I think I'll stick to gardening Silas. This was just a special occasion. Case closed. Pendergast banged the gavel. The heavy oak doors of the courthouse swung shut behind them, muffling the chaos of the press that had gathered on the steps. Peter walked out into the crisp New York air, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel the cold. She felt light. weightless. Beside her, Victoria walked slowly, her cane tapping a steady rhythm on the pavement. "Mum," Peter said, her voice thick with emotion. She stopped on the sidewalk, ignoring the flashing cameras in the distance. I don't know what to say. I thought you were disappointed in me. I thought that's why you stayed in Switzerland. Because I married him." Victoria stopped. She turned to look at her daughter. The iron mask she had worn inside the courtroom finally cracked, revealing the tired, loving mother beneath. "I was disappointed, Peter," Victoria admitted, her voice soft. "Not because you married him, but because I saw you shrinking. Year by year, you made yourself smaller to fit into his world. You stopped painting. You stopped laughing. You became a ghost in your own life." Victoria reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from Peter's face. "I stayed away because I knew you had to find your own breaking point. If I had intervened sooner, you would have resented me. You had to be the one to call me. You had to be the one to say enough." "I was so scared," Peter whispered. "I know," Victoria said, "but look at you now. You aren't scared. You're standing." A black SUV pulled up to the curb. The back door opened and a social worker stepped out, followed by two small figures. "Mommy!" The scream was pure, unadulterated joy. Leo and Sam, looking pale and thin but safe, sprinted across the sidewalk. Peter dropped to her knees. She didn't care about her dress. She didn't care about the pavement. She opened her arms and caught them, the force of their bodies knocking her back slightly. She buried her face in their necks, smelling the familiar scent of baby shampoo and childhood. "I've got you," she sobbed, rocking them back and forth. "I've got you. Mommy's here, and nobody is ever taking you away again." Victoria watched them, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. She leaned against her cane, watching the reunion she had orchestrated with surgical precision. 6 months later. The Sterling estate in the Hamptons looked different. The cold, minimalist art statues that Derek had loved were gone. The pristine, do-not-touch white furniture was gone. In their place were colourful rugs, finger paintings taped to the walls, and a golden retriever puppy that was currently chewing on a very expensive slipper. Peter sat on the patio holding a cup of tea. She looked different too. The grey cardigan was gone. She wore a vibrant blue dress, her hair loose and wavy. She looked 10 years younger. On the table in front of her was a newspaper. The headline read, "Billionaire Tycoon sentenced to 25 years for fraud and child endangerment." Below it, a smaller article, "Disgraced attorney Bradford Halloway disbarred and sentenced to 15 years in RICO case." Peter traced the headlines with her finger. They couldn't hurt her anymore. Derek was in a maximum security facility in upstate New York. His assets liquidated, his reputation incinerated. Halloway was in federal prison, likely giving legal advice to inmates for cigarettes. The Obsidian Ventures money, the $250 million Derek had tried to hide, had been recovered. Peter hadn't kept it all. She had already donated $50 million to legal aid clinics for women trapped in abusive marriages. She had started a foundation named after her mother, the Fairchild Initiative. Speaking of her mother, the sliding glass door opened. Victoria stepped out wearing a gardening hat and carrying a basket of fresh tomatoes. She had moved into the guest cottage temporarily, which everyone knew meant permanently. "The tomatoes are coming in nicely," Victoria noted, sitting down opposite Peter. "Unlike Derek's appeal, I heard his lawyer quit yesterday." Peter smiled, sipping her tea. "Which lawyer? The third one, or the fourth one?" "The fourth," Victoria chuckled. "Apparently Derek threw a chair at him." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the twins chase the puppy across the vast green lawn, a lawn that was no longer a prison yard, but a playground. "You know," Peter said softly, "I used to think power was money, or shouting, or having people fear you." "And now?" Victoria asked. "Now I know," Peter said, looking at her mother. "Power is just standing your ground when everyone expects you to fall." Victoria reached across the table and patted Peter's hand. "That's the Fairchild way, darling. We don't scream. We don't shout. We just wait for the right moment. And then we bring the house down." From the yard, Leo's laughter rang out, bright and clear, rising up into the blue sky. It was the sound of freedom. And for Peter Sterling, it was the sweetest sound in the world. And that is the story of how one arrogant billionaire and his shark of a lawyer learned the hardest lesson of their lives. Never underestimate a mother fighting for her children. And never, ever assume the quiet woman in the corner is helpless. Derek Sterling thought his money made him untouchable. He thought he could buy the law. But he forgot that justice isn't about how much is in your bank account. It's about the truth. And sometimes the truth wears a vintage Chanel suit and carries a cane. If this story satisfied your craving for justice, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets us know you want more stories like this. And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a daily dose of drama and karma. What would you have done if you were in Peter's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.